after these strikes, these really ineffectual strikes that certainly could spill over into broader war, but have been now heavily criticized. Heavily criticized. So Russia immediately called for UN Security Council meeting, condemned the strikes from the United States and Yemen. And so the U.S. airstrikes on Yemen are another example of the Anglo-Saxons' perversion of UN Security Council resolution, said Maria Zakharova, the ministry spokesperson. With a complete disregard for international law, the strike showed, she said. And so, of course, their UN representative as well had very similar statements. But it's not just Russia that's it's heavily condemning and criticizing and speculating about the worthwhileness and the worthiness of these strikes. It's also the UK Parliament, and it's also Congress. So Biden and Sunak are both facing backlash over their unconstitutional attack on Yemen. So officials both in the US and the UK have been criticizing Biden and Sunak for bypassing the legislative process and the constitutional requirements to conduct military operations in foreign nations. Some of this is rich to me because this is something the United States and the UK do all the time. However, I'm wondering what your take is on the fallout here, and why is it that there isn't this air of confidence? Usually after something like this, the United States, the UK, whoever participated in some kind of coalition of the willing, would want to come out of it with their chests out and their heads held high. Not so much here.
Well, they can't. They just bombed one of the poorest countries in the world, and Russia was very quick to point that out, which was, Russia's playing a very great geopolitical game right now. I talked to Andrei Martyanov about it yesterday. He was fantastic, but Russia jumped right on that, the hypocrisy of it all. You mentioned the backlash in the Congress and the Parliament. I think Britain is much more poised to have a political backlash, and they're better with political activism because of the access that the actual people have to their MPs. For us in the United States, I see zero backlash. I mean, there were a few statements. People said it was unconstitutional. What can you do? Joe Biden is literally a sitting duck in his twilight year. You're going to impeach him now. By the time you get to it, it'd be out of office. Like it's all a facade. So, they don't look good on the public in the international arena. They don't care how they look at home. And I think that's part of the issue here, is that they don't really care. I mean, Rishi Sunak did that without even, he made the decision and then briefed them after, and was like, all right, I'll go brief the opposition to let them know we're going to start bombing tonight. And they were like, wait, what? And so it's really just, it's also kind of assisting in showing that that Russia has been well, they're all hypocrites. They can't even beat us in Ukraine, and now they're bombing a Yemeni population with tornado or typhoon jets and F-18s. This is a huge embarrassment. This is a huge embarrassment politically and militarily.
Yeah, and this embarrassment comes as the United States, Joe Biden, and the UK. I think your sources and your information that you've gleaned on who's kind of wagging the tail here on this operation. It would make sense too, because Eurasia trade, and of course we know UK, all right, out of the EU, but still Eurasia trade between Eurasia as a landmass. The UK certainly is very interested in that. And 40+% of it goes through the Red Sea. So it makes sense that the UK would have a vested interest, especially with regard to what Yemen is doing. But at the same time, what is the end game here? Because they don't want a broader war. They're admitting that they can't fight, that they can't defeat Yemen. I mean, they can't. They Russia, forget about it. That was always such just a disastrous pipe dream. But Yemen, a country already devastated, a people already devastated, they're admitting that they're not stopping them. So what's next here? Because at the same time this is happening, you have, I think Israel gave its case or defense after South Africa essentially dragged them at the Hague, just absolutely gave them one of the biggest judicial shellackings I think I've seen ever, especially at such a big stage. And, you know, none of this points to the United States has any kind of, or the West in general, has any kind of plan here.
Yeah.
So what is going to happen? Because it seems like the SHIT is rolling downhill, but it's not the United States at the top. It's the United States is actually the one at the bottom of the hill.
Yeah, I don't think there is a plan. I think that's the terrifying thing. I think that when they do things like this, that you're like, what positive or negative, there's no outcome to these strikes. Nothing has changed. You're bombing a poor population. Like, the fact that there is no plan, and that's kind of terrifying. You know, that there's no plan and we just bomb places indiscriminately because they stopped a few of our ships instead of just trying to reel Israel in from completing a genocide in Gaza. It really shows you that, just like you said, it's rolling downhill, and the United States is not at the top. It's Israel at the top. It's literally Israel at the top. So instead of, you know, the UK economy is in the toilet, the EU economy is in the toilet, the American economy is on its way down the toilet, all thanks to Russia. So, and in doing these strikes, you know, nothing's going to happen economically, politically, or militarily. There's nothing on either side. It tells you that this is a very, very desperate act. This is a very desperate act of countries that are not willing to put their creation, i.e. Israel, because it's created by Britain and sustained by the United States. They're either not willing or incapable of telling their little pet to stop the genocide in Gaza. Tells you that who's really running the show here? It's Israel. It's Israel.
You know, it reminds me, I know we're both dog owners. It reminds me of the dog owners that you sometimes see out in the neighborhood, where despite the fact that they are the master or they're the owner, they're the ones who are supposed to be dictating things. You see the dog just going nuts. They're leading the show. They're darting. They're not paying attention to what their owner wants or is doing or saying. There's just no command there. It's kind of how I see Israel at the moment. While the U.S. certainly exercises an incredible amount of leverage, just if we look at the material side of this, the United States, without its aid, Israel would be in a lot of trouble in terms of its sheer influence in the region and perhaps its own existence as it currently is constituted. But at the same time, we have a situation now where Israel has gone so out of hand, has reacted in such a cruel and unusual way, even for its own very, very, very low standards, that the United States is the one looking. And I think this is important because a lot of people will say, oh, Danny, no, it's not. Israel is not the puppet master here. They're not leading the United States around. But it's the optics that in, a conflict like this and in a development like this, the optics truly do matter. And there are times where the perhaps the puppet ends up being the puppet master, given the host of maladies and issues that the United States is currently facing.
Yeah, and with Ukraine, it wasn't really as important to win the kind of hearts and minds. It was easy for them to do so, but it wasn't as important. For Israel, they need to have hearts and minds because that's how they survive. They need to. They need an emotional propaganda. They need to have people supporting them, and they just are losing that, and they're completely lost touch with reality. Somebody in the audience said, the U.S. is in charge. I will argue this to the death. Especially after the Epstein revelations, it's very clear and I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but it's very clear the United States is not in charge. I mean, pretty much a turning point after JFK is when the Israel really started taking the reins. You mentioned the aid, they can't survive without it. I don't even think that we can use the aid as blackmail anymore because they are blackmailing us on top of the aid. Like they use the aid for whatever they want now. Look at their military. It has not well armed. Their uniforms look like janitor uniforms. Where is the money going? So literally they're kind of holding us hostage with information. We know that they had information on like all of our past presidents back to at least Clinton and possibly Bush Sr. So who's really in charge? We've got IDF personnel walking our halls of Congress in uniform. Who is in charge here? Could you imagine if they wore like a PLA, like uniform, like I like, and you're like you have dual allegiance, and to Americans that's like no. If they're loyal to Israel, it's the same thing. Like we've become so enmeshed, and just we literally are. Like I didn't even realize it until like everybody's like the Zionists, they control everything. I'm like, that's an anti-Semitic trope. Like that's such BS. And then we got to here and I'm like, why are we passing resolutions that condemn anti-Zionism as like it was just like, wow, what is even happening? So very clear that they're pretty much just doing whatever they want. And again, instead of stopping what's going on in Gaza, maybe supporting the ceasefire resolutions that have been put through, they would rather just bomb Yemen again, bombing nothing, wasting money and time for a country that is just on a hell bent on committing a full-fledged ethnic cleansing of a coastal region.
Yeah, and what's interesting here, and perhaps we don't even have to get into a rabbit hole with this question because when it comes to Israel and the United States, at this point, you use the term enmeshment or enmeshed. In enmeshment, essentially what we're looking at is if we're looking at, instead of two different animals, we're looking at the same animal. We're looking at the same thing. The United States, what it has done, you use the word tethered too. It's like it has indeed tethered itself. Those tethered looks like sutures now. It looks like they are actually conjoined. And when you are conjoined, push pull, it can go in either direction. You could be pushing or pulling. The other side could be pushing and pulling. But at the end of the day, you are conjoined. So it doesn't actually matter who's leading the show. You are serving the same foreign policy interests. And I think that's what's so interesting about this moment, too, is that as Israel is being protected by the United States in this way, these strikes really do. If we look at it, too, a lot of economists have been noting, and even in the Western mainstream media, Associated Press, they've been saying, well, actually, the economic consequences of what Ansar Allah is doing, it's not good, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be an existential economic crash. Maybe eventually, but it's going to take time, and things change over time. Hey, hopefully there will no longer be a genocide in Gaza, or at least that will change dramatically over a relatively short period. So a lot of economists weren't the ones who, at least now, they're saying, well, they're looking at these strikes and saying, ooh, that's a huge risk to the overall economy. Let's say there's a regional war that's ignited because of them. And at the same time, you have the United States and the UK doing it anyway, ostensibly to protect Israel. And some have made the case that this was done also to take attention off of Israel as it receives one of the most fundamentally embarrassing humiliations that it's ever faced, which is going in front of the International Court of Justice. And I'll play some footage of that of one of the representatives of Israel at the ICJ just literally bumbling. It's an embarrassment. So I'm wondering what your take is on that.
I don't think, it's kind of been mind-boggling since this started. I'm really not a big propaganda debunker, so I kind of watch other people debunking it, and watching Israel is kind of like, I don't think that they're capable of feeling embarrassed. Like they're so not even brainwashed. They're so, I don't even know how to explain it. Like the things that they say in front of the UN, putting on a yellow star and not feeling like that might not be the best idea. It tells me you have no self-awareness and you can't read a room. The defense is I talked to Stanley Cohen and Mohammed Akunji today after the ICJ, and I've been watching Norman Finkelstein's kind of commentary on it, as well as Mr. Rabbani. But they're at the ICJ saying just the most bizarre things, like using like Twitter posts as like evidence. And you're like, do you take anything serious? Like, what is going on in there? Highly recommend you reading Max Blumenthal's Goliath. It's 10 years old, but even then, 10 years ago, it was a maniac lunatic state. Nothing makes sense. And now you're seeing them come out of a kind of isolation. They self-impose their isolation, right? Because everything outside of Israel is scary, you know? And so they come out of their isolation onto the international arena, and you're like, you really don't know how to function like a normal state, do you? Like this, you don't even know that this isn't normal behavior. It's not normal to stand up and hold up. He held up a Daily Mail article at the UN, and it's like, and that was your evidence for a UN resolution and why the UN is anti-Semitic. Like, these people are unserious, and I can't tell if they're in. Half the time, I can't tell if they're in on the joke or they're just not able to feel. Sometimes I'm like, they're doing it because they know they can. They have to be. Like, nobody can be this crazy. But then other times I'm like, they really believe the stuff that they're saying. Like, I'm just, it's a, as to quote Norman Finkelstein, it's a lunatic state. Lunatics. Absolute lunatics. But I really want to see the clip you have lined up from the ICJ.
Yeah, it's very short, actually. It's from even Mediaite. I mean, we're talking about an absolute let's say not so reputable I guess you could call it mainstream media outlet. They posted about Malcolm Shaw, and he's the British lawyer known as a so-called genocide expert, very loyal to Israel, and also, of course, very loyal to pushing a definition of genocide in genocide cases that, of course, benefit the collective West. We have to remember that institutions like the ICC have generally been used to the benefit of the collective West. Here, this was hilarious. Israel's British lawyer keeps losing his place during defense argument disaster. And here is what it looks like. It's just a minute.
Of genocide were understood by the, excuse me, I've lost a page. The court was prepared to consider not only the question of the plausibility of rights, well, someone has shuffled my papers.
It must have been Hamas.
It was Hamas.
Hamas. He's still looking.
Wow. But also the
look at this is dude, they look confident here. They look real. Anyway,
Oi, governor, someone shuffled the papers.
Must have been Hamas.
question of the possible breach of such rights.
Good. Even that alone, that's just 1 minute. I mean, Max Blumenthal and Aaron Mate over at the Gray Zone did many minutes of the bumblery of, if that's even a word, of Israel at the ICJ. But I mean, the United States really does, even though we know that Joe Biden wouldn't really do much better up there, but it seems like the United States actually has a huge reason to need to protect Israel's image at this point. Maybe divert the eyes of world public opinion. Perhaps get everyone angry at you, the United States of the United Kingdom, over Yemen, while Israel conducts its embarrassing testimony at
or
ICJ.
they have to before Israel reveals more secrets. You know, this Epstein thing, like the fact that and again, not the rabbit hole, but what was the reaction of the most prominent Zionist on there, Alan Dershowitz? Literally went on national TV called the people that wanted the documents to be released radical feminists of the Me Too movement, and he said he bets they don't condemn Hamas. Like, that's the psychosis that we're dealing with.
Yeah.
The United States is committed to protecting that. There is something that Israel has on the United States that is terrifying. It has to be, because none of this is rational, and it can't just be the Samson option. It can't just be something like that. It has to be some stuff that is literally able to take the United States empire down with just the information. It has to be. Because I've never seen anything like it. It doesn't make sense from a geopolitical standpoint. It's not rational behavior. It's not even rational for an empire that's dying. It doesn't make sense. Oh my God, somebody called me brain dead. That wasn't nice. I'm not that stupid.
No, not at all. Not at all. Yeah, I tend to look away from the chat.
I think there's so many comments.
Look away. Yeah, well, with the United States, I mean, the United States and Israel certainly have very aligned interests in the region. They both want expansion. They both want instability. They want to destroy the axis of resistance. Perhaps we can talk about this. They both want to see Iran, Hezbollah. They want to see, of course, Yemen's leadership, Ansar Allah. They want to see all of these forces eradicated. They want to see Bashar al-Assad gone. They certainly have many aligned interests. But the United States, and I'm wondering your view on this, given Russia's condemnation of this, we've been following here, and I know you have at DD Geopolitics, the fact that the United States had long shifted its point of attention. Now, it doesn't mean that things ended there. The U.S. has tens of thousands of military personnel, dozens of bases. There's a lot of U.S. influence in West Asia, but they had long shifted priorities to Russia and China, almost ceding ground that what the Middle East is, what West Asia is what it's going to be right now. And the best they could do was to maintain whatever presence they had and whatever foreign policy objectives they wanted to pursue or they had been pursuing. Now, Israel has kind of shifted the calculus a lot there, where Israel has, through its brutal response to the prison break, through to the resistance in Palestine, has dragged the United States pretty far down a rabbit hole, so to speak, with regard to what's going on in the region. And so maybe you could talk about, because we're talking a lot about Ansar Allah in Yemen, but obviously this is the axis of resistance we're talking about that has both Israel and the United States quite concerned.
I think that the United States and Israel and Britain should be concerned about the axis of resistance, because what we've seen is a reconciliation between Sunni and Shia and militias that maybe not got along before have been able to come together. I mean, it was prior to this war, but Assad and Hamas, they normalized their relations. We saw normalization between Saudi and Assad. I mean, you know, the Syrian Arab army is still a force to be reckoned with. Russia has personal interests in there. The Iraqi resistance, who we hadn't really heard from very much in the past couple of years, have now huge resurgence of activity for them, defending bases in Iraq and Syria. These are illegal occupations by the United States. They've already been asked to leave multiple times. They're there illegally. They're not going to break the axis of resistance that way. Their best bet to break this axis of resistance is to try to get Saudi involved, but Saudi entered BRICS. So it's almost like they're very late to the game. There's not really a whole lot of moves left, and that's why we're kind of seeing silly stuff like just bombing Yemen, or like bombing an airport in Syria, like silly things. Like, I just don't see how the United States at this point can undermine the axis of resistance, given the recent successes of Iran, especially in conjunction to BRICS, Russia, and China. Iran is poised to become a world power. I would argue that it is the hegemon of the Middle East. And that's the thing that is the scariest thing, is, are the other Arab nations going to be able to accept that? That's what I would worry about, breaking the axis of resistance, because they're not immune to propaganda either. There are still a lot of Arabs and even in the West and even in the Middle East that are kind of averse to Iran and not really too certain about them. So I think that's where the threats will really come from, is kind of Arabs having doubts, or maybe some nations not really being that cool with someone else taking the lead here. But I don't think that there's any way that at this point the United States or the UK or Israel can undermine the axis of resistance. They're actually making them look cooler, if that's even like, if that, Hezbollah is having a field day with propaganda. I mean, Hamas is coming out with stuff that looks like they produced it.
Wow. Yeah, I've been shocked by the footage from Hamas,
Right,
actually.
and what's Israel doing? Releasing TikTok videos of pretty girls with bad foundation.
Girls and videos of them torturing men and the blown out streets of Gaza. It's like, yeah, it's pathetic, really.
Donuts in a tank around an Israeli flag that you planted in the middle of a beach where you told us that this wasn't imperialistic or a land grab. So it's like, people aren't stupid anymore. We just got off of a 2-year propaganda information war, where a lot of people participated, and I'm seeing that same community shift over, and they're like, "This is BS of even worse caliber than we saw coming out of Ukraine." So people are really getting clued into it, and yeah, I mean, if anything, they're kind of creating a better scenario for the axis of resistance in terms of PR and propaganda.
Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.